All right, so we're here to talk about office ergonomics this morning and give you a quick rundown of what we're going to do. I'm going to start by talking about what musculoskeletal injuries are. As an ergonomist, that's really one of my primary objectives is reducing or eliminating musculoskeletal injuries if we can. We're going to talk about what the risk factors are, and then we're going to spend the bulk of the day talking about office ergonomics, how to get set up correctly. And as Rob mentioned, we'll have examples from both traditional office and then a home office, as we still have lots of folks that are working hybrid or who are working at home full-time. We'll talk about laptop use. We'll finish off by talking about the importance of movement, and that's applicable whether you are in a traditional or home office. And then we'll talk about some resources that are available to you, and Rob will certainly share by email post-presentation as well. So musculoskeletal injuries, for those of you that don't know, are injuries affecting the bones, muscles, tendons, ligaments, and nerves, and they're typically due to exposure to repetitive, forceful, or awkward body movements. So these are generally the ones that I'm interested in as an ergonomist are wear and tear injuries, right? Injuries that occur over time. Okay, and they are, you will hear different types of, you'll hear different names for this category of injuries. Could be musculoskeletal disorders, musculoskeletal injuries, cumulative trauma disorders, repetitive strain injuries, overuse injuries. They're all talking about very similar types of injuries. It's things that develop slowly and over time. It's not I go outside and I you know, it's wet here in Calgary this morning. I slip on some wet leaves and, you know, sprain my ankle or break my wrist. That's more of an acute type injury. So how these injuries develop, and this is just kind of giving you a high level example. If you think of the red line at the top as being your tissue's capacity, so and we're talking soft tissue here, so muscles, tendons, ligaments, and the blue line at the bottom is the demand that's placed on those tissues. You can see if you're sitting up in a good posture, not a whole lot of demand. If we're leaning forward, we're into a little bit more of an awkward posture, higher demand on some of those tissues. If we do something whole body, like we're sweeping or raking, you know, the amount of demand varies, but it's certainly higher. As you can see here, without any breaks, our tissue's capacity is decreasing over time. We have some rest, we go have a sleep for however long we happen to be able to do that, and you can see our tissue's capacity increases again. We do something very heavy in whole body, such as, you know, using a jackhammer as an example, putting lots of demand on that tissue's capacity is going to decrease more quickly. And kind of the point of this slide is at some point, if we don't have sufficient recovery, or if we put more demand on our tissues than we have capacity for, we have an injury. And quite often that happens, it doesn't have to be the heavy activity. You know, it could be just we're standing up or we get into an awkward posture or whatever. It doesn't necessarily happen during those heavier activities like using the jackhammer or doing lots of sweeping. So that's kind of at a high level how our tissues are how the impact of what the impact of work is on our tissues over time, and if we don't have sufficient recovery time. In terms of risk factors for developing injuries, we have our biomechanical risk factors, which we'll talk about in more detail here in a minute. We have organizational risk factors, so how our work is designed. And then we have personal risk factors. You know, what kind of physical condition are we in? What's our age? What have we had a previous injury? Things like that. And all of these things factor into our risk for musculoskeletal injury or illness. What I'm looking for as an ergonomist is really looking at the biomechanical risk factors when I'm in any type of work environment. And I think that's one of the things that people sometimes have a challenge with. They think, well, you know, how do you know enough about what I do to determine whether I'm at risk for injury? But the reality is, whether we're in an office like we're talking about today, or I'm watching a garbage collector or a nurse or any other occupation, I'm looking at these same risk factors. I'm looking at what are the postures, how awkward are they, what are the forces, how heavy are they, how high are they, and then what is the duration or what is the repetition associated with that. And there's guidelines that tell us what our risk of injury is based on looking at these different criteria. So these are the things that I'm looking for. Now, in an office environment, forces aren't high, but our duration can be long. We could be in the office 8, 9, 10 hours, and our postures aren't necessarily extremely awkward, but they're awkward combined with a long duration of time that they can have an impact on us. So one of the things I always like to stress when I do an office ergonomics presentation is that if you leave this presentation thinking I only have minor changes to make, I don't know if it's going to make a difference, they probably still will make a difference, just given how long we tend to be in an office environment. So, you know, like I said, if you've got, even if you identify small changes, definitely worth making them. So what I'd like to do is kind of go body part by body part. We're going to start bottom up. We're going to start by talking about the legs and feet. This is what we would affectionately refer to as the executive stretch. Maybe you see the person in the corner office doing this. Not our preferred posture by any means, but kind of funny just the same. So when we look at leg postures, if we kind of go left to right on your screen here, on the left, anyone that's a little bit shorter in stature has probably sat at a desk that is a little high for them. Most furniture's at fixed height furniture is at 29 or 30 inches. For a lot of people, if they sit with their upper body in a good posture, their feet can't touch the floor. Common solution for those folks that are a little shorter in stature is to tuck their feet underneath and put their feet on the casters. And when we do that, you can see there's additional contact stress on the underside and back of our leg, which we want to try and avoid. A less common, but certainly something we do run into from time to time, is someone who's sitting a little low and their knees are higher than their hips. And the big concern, there's two concerns in this posture. One, you can see a portion of this individual's leg is unsupported, which will become fatiguing over time. And then they've got a more closed hip angle, which has a greater chance of creating low back discomfort, as we've got muscles and tendons across the hip. So we can have some discomfort associated with that. So when we are, things that we're concerned with, certainly contact stress is a big one when we talk about the legs. So two different examples here. Picture on the left, we've kind of already seen. So somebody's sitting really high, their feet aren't supported, so the weight of their legs are hanging off the front of the chair, and then as a result, they get extra contact stress on the underside of their legs. Another very common issue that sometimes will happen, you'll see both these issues with one individual. If we look at the picture on the right, we can see that there is no space between the back of this individual's leg and the front of their chair. So their seat pan's a little too long for them. They sit all the way back. They're getting pressure on the back of their knee, and that'll compress the soft tissues, can have an impact on circulation. And most of us, anyone who's sat in a chair that's too big for them, we don't like stuff touching the back of our leg. So what we tend to do is scoot forward in the chair, and then the impact is we don't have enough back support, or we're kind of slouching to reach the backrest. So both of these are contact stress on the leg and things that we want to try and avoid. So things that are most important for the feet and the legs. First one is we need your feet to be supported, and that can be flat on the floor, like you see in the picture on the left, or it can be using a footrest. Now, if you can get your feet flat to the floor, your need for a footrest is definitely decreased. You don't need one. Some people will still like one to have the option to vary their posture, and that's fine. It's just that it's not necessary if we can get our feet all the way to the floor. Other people like a footrest because they feel like it helps them kind of push themselves back in their chair, and that's fine too. Again, it's not necessary, but a footrest is a relatively inexpensive item if somebody feels that it's going to improve their posture a bit. All right, so we'll move on to the back next, and this is certainly an area of the body where we hear lots of complaints, and there's lots of things that can lead us to back discomfort. Certainly awkward or twisted postures, inappropriately adjusted equipment. I would say the office chair is the least understood piece of equipment in the office. You know, if it's got 3 or 4 paddles, we figure out which one makes it go up and down, and after that, we're generally kind of scared of it. So as a result, oftentimes people are sitting in a chair that has lots of adjustment, but it hasn't been adjusted because they just don't know how to do it. So you know, we want to become comfortable with the available adjustments that are in our chairs. There's lots of chairs out there that don't have a ton of adjustment too, and that can be, that's sort of a separate issue. But if we've got the adjustment, we definitely want to make sure we know how it works. Workstation layout, which could lead to excessive reaches, can have some issues. Static postures, right? Office work is generally fairly sedentary. We know that the more sedentary or static we are, the greater our risk of back pain. So those two things kind of go hand in hand. And then stress and muscular tension. We all have different physical responses to stress. For many of us, it sits in the form of tension in our shoulders and neck, right? So if we're having a bad day or if we're working towards a deadline, you know, we might get more tension in our shoulders. And then if you combine that with our, you know, our monitor's too high or our keyboard's too low or something along those lines, it's just sort of aggravating it, right? So definitely a number of things that can have an impact on how our back is feeling throughout and by the end of the day. So picture on the left, you can see this person's kind of slouched forward. We've highlighted that their upper back is kind of rounded out and highlighted in red. Picture on the right, this person's sitting very upright. What I want you to notice is they've got this gentle S curve to their back. Okay, and you know, if you look at just the torso itself without the, you know, without seeing the spinal column highlighted internally there, you would go, oh, this person's sitting up straight. And when we are sitting up straight, we have this gentle S curve to our back, and that curve is important because the intervertebral discs. So we've got vertebrae in our back, right? The bones that protect our spinal column, and then in between each of those bones, we have intervertebral discs, and those are there to provide cushioning between the vertebrae. And when we're in this gentle S curve, the pressure on those discs is evenly distributed. Now, why those discs are really important is we've got nerves coming out from our spinal column that are going to various areas of the body. So if we have even pressure on those discs, they keep a nice even space between the vertebrae, and we don't have any compression on those nerves. Over time, those discs are going to wear and tear, and if we put extra awkward postures like we see in the picture on the left on them, those discs are going to wear down quicker, and eventually we can have compression on some of those nerves, and that's where we get back pain from. So some of the time where we get our back pain from. So the other thing I would say about the picture on the right, this person looks like they're in great posture. You know, when I go to do an ergonomics assessment, people tend to sit up straight because the ergo police are there. I don't expect that anyone could sit perfectly straight like that for 8 hours without getting up and moving and varying their posture throughout the day. So the more frequently you move and get up and change your posture, the easier it is to maintain that posture, right? So movement is really important for that. Okay, so other things that we can do. We want to have our work squarely in front of us. So here's an example of someone working with a single monitor and some reference documents on the left. And the picture on the right, you can see that they've moved those reference documents directly in front of their monitor. Now, probably more common now for many of us to have 2 screens, right? And maybe the reference documents are on a second screen rather than on hard copy, but we still have people referencing hard copies. Okay. The other thing I would say is I still run into people where they might just have a monitor, or maybe they have 2 monitors and they're not squarely in front of them, or they have their monitors separated. So you want to have things so you can look straight forward. Okay, so I want you to do a little physical exercise with me while we're listening here. I want you to look up to the ceiling. Okay, so just moving your head. I want you to look down in front of you, down at your keyboard or whatever is directly in front of you. Okay, so up and down, that should be fairly easy. I want you to look to the left, and then I want you to look to the right. So again, turning your head. Okay. And then, so again, left and right should be fairly easy. Next, I want you to try looking down and to the left or down and to the right. So combining those two movements. And what you should feel is that doesn't feel as good, right? You feel a little pulling. So our neck is really good at looking up and down. Our neck is really good at looking left and right. Our neck is not really good at looking down and to the left or down and to the right. So as you see in the picture on the left, that's kind of something we want to try and avoid. All right. So in terms of chair adjustments, all chairs are obviously have different adjustments. Some have more than others. What I would encourage you to do is, particularly if you have one or two fairly common chairs in your office environment, try and figure out how they work. If you can, most of the bigger manufacturers you can find YouTube videos on how they adjust. So if you know what the chair is, or if you can figure out what the name of the chair is, do a little search on it and try and find a video of it. All kinds of people have created, most of the major manufacturers have their own videos, but then there's also lots of people who have created videos. So you want to know as best as possible the different adjustments that are on your chair. I'm going to highlight a couple different ones here, but it's really difficult when everyone's working with different chairs. But one of the things that we can definitely talk about that is adjustable on most chairs, and it wouldn't be all chairs again, but most chairs that have some adjustability, is your lumbar support. So as you see in the picture here, the easiest way to find this is you stand up, you find your lumbar curve, which is going to be the kind of the part that curves inwards towards your stomach. You want to keep one hand there with your palm facing backwards. You want to sit back down. And then if your chair is adjustable in the style that you see on this particular picture, that whole backrest moves up and down. So the lumbar curve or the lumbar support, so the bump in the chair that's going to fill in that hole in your, or that the small of your back, that moves up and down. So you sit down and then you want to line up the palm of your hand with where that bump is. And once you set that there, then that's going to make you feel better sitting back, and you're going to be encouraged to sit back in the chair. Other chairs, a lot of the mesh back chairs might have a bar or a little plastic thing that moves up and down, like the backrest stays where it is, but the harder part moves up and down, where the wires move up and down, so you can get some more support in there. Anytime you have an adjustable lumbar support, you want to be making use of that. Sometimes people will, if you have a chair that doesn't have it, you might look at something like adding in an obus form, an external backrest, or if there's some support but not enough, you might want to use a scarf or a towel or something just to give yourself a little bit more support. There's all kinds of different things that we can do to give ourselves additional support. All right. So one of the items that so other adjustments that you can make, obviously adjusting for your height, and you'll see once we get in more to the hand section, adjusting the height is going to be dependent on our workstation a little bit. But I wanted to share just some examples of things that you can do if you're working home occasionally, or you don't have a full office, a full proper task chair at home. These are some things that you can do, some simple solutions. I wouldn't suggest these kind of long term if you can. If you're going to be working 2 or 3 days a week at home, I would encourage you to make that investment at some point. But these are some things you can do with kind of furniture you might have at home. So if you're working at a table that's too high for you and you don't have a height adjustable chair, simply adding a pillow underneath, as you see in the picture on the left, that's one way we can bump ourselves up and make that fixed height surface and fixed height chair work. If that results in us not having foot support and we don't have a footrest, using some old textbooks is a solution that can work. And you can see here in the middle there, that person's knees are at 90 degrees, their feet are supported. They look like they're in a pretty good posture. And then if we have a chair, like a dining room chair or a kitchen chair, it's not going to have lumbar support because it's not designed to be sat in for an extended period of time. This individual has added a pillow to the back of it. just to give themselves a little bit more support. So again, these are kind of more temporary fixes. And I understand, you know, buying a task chair is an investment as well, but you know, again, I'd encourage you to invest in that if you're there long term. But for short term, these are some quick and easy things that we can be doing. All right, so we're going to move on to the hands and wrists next. And obviously, in the office environment, we're doing lots of typing. So lots of typing using the mouse. Not as much paperwork as we used to, although there'd certainly be certain offices where that still occurs. But we certainly see lots of upper limb concerns as a result of our computer use. So common issues or things that we run into: awkward postures, obviously, resting against a hard edge, and you can see it here. This individual's they're in an awkward posture and they're resting up against the front edge of the work surface of their keyboard. High forces are not as common in the office, although I will say unnecessary forces are. And then repetitive motion, right? Any of you that are on the computer, whether you're doing data entry or just responding to emails or doing other tasks on the computer, you know, our repetition rate is pretty high for many of us working in an office environment. So these are all things that we are concerned with. So the first one, and you know, the most important one from my perspective to address is correct working height. So you can see in the picture on the left, this work surface is high. Person's wrists are higher than their elbows, and we've got kind of the opposite problem on the picture on the right, where the work surface is a little too low. Ideally, what we're aiming for, and this would be true whether you are sitting or standing, is we want to have our keyboard surface at about elbow height. Okay, and we want that to be true when our shoulders are relaxed. So quite often, you know, particularly if people are working at a fixed height surface, it's at 29 or 30 inches, and you know, the person is a little, you know, can't get their chair high enough. What they'll do is they'll jack up their armrests so that their wrists are straight, but then their shoulders are really high. So it's important that shoulders are relaxed, and then that we're still able to work at approximately elbow height. Okay, so this is what we are aiming for. So here's an example of hard edges. So, you know, if the work surface is too high for us, more common that we're going to rest our wrist or the underside of our forearm on that hard surface. And if you feel the underside of your forearm, soft tissue there, you wiggle your fingers, you can feel the movement of the muscles and tendons there. You know, there's not a whole lot protecting that. So having a hard surface compressing against that will certainly cause us problems over time. We want to avoid that. So as I mentioned, same principle applies whether we're seated or standing. We want the work surface at about elbow height, and when our shoulders are relaxed, and we can see that in two examples here. As I mentioned, high forces are not an issue in the office, but I do feel like unnecessary forces are. So, you know, if you can hear the person typing 3 cubicles away from you, they are hitting the keys much harder than they need to. And it's probably irritating to you, and it's putting extra wear and tear on them. So we'll occasionally run into that. The most common thing I would say I see is people hanging on to the mouse when they don't need to. And what I mean by that is they click, and then they know the next thing they're going to do is something with the mouse, but 10 seconds turns into 30 seconds, turns into 2 minutes, and they're still hanging on to it. Well, like, you don't need to hold on to the mouse, and it's not a whole lot of force, but it's an unnecessary force. So if you're holding it, you know, twice as long as you need to, you're gripping, you know, for twice as long as you need to. So we want to get into the habit of letting go where we can. And then the other thing we'll see is sometimes people will even have like a pen or a pencil in their hand while they're mousing, so it's kind of an unnecessary force and an awkward posture. So just some different things that we want to try and avoid. So we've talked about positioning for the wrists. Want to get a little bit more into the shoulders now, and I already sort of alluded to this. If our shoulders are pushed up at all, and you'd be less likely to see kind of what you're seeing in the image here, but if this desk was a little higher, again, quite common that people will jack up the armrests to achieve that. So we want to lower our armrests to the point where we can just relax onto them. And a question I often get is, well, do I need to use armrests? You don't need to be using armrests the whole time, but it is good to have something to rest onto to give your arms a break. Now, there are some people that will use armrests all the time, like their arms are always resting on there, and that's fine. But you can be hovering over top and then just resting when you need a break as well. And then kind of a final scenario that's worth talking about is any of you that are a little smaller in stature and you know, you might have a chair that's a little bit too big for you. If the armrests are preventing you from getting close enough to the work surface, then sometimes it's better just to have those armrests off until we can get armrests that are, or a chair that allows you to get close enough where the armrests aren't interfering. So armrests are good, but sometimes they need to go. Okay. And then other risk factors, if we're doing lots of reaching. So, you know, see the example of the phone here. I think traditional landlines are, you know, in large part going away. We tend to do more calls on Teams or on a VoIP phone where we might not even have a hard phone. But the point is, if we're doing reaching of any kind, that can be problematic. So if we look at our setup here, and I would encourage you to, you can try this kind of like you see the person moving around there. I want you to put your elbows by your sides, and I want you to just sweep your hands in front of you. And that will overlay kind of what that green area is. And that's our primary reach zone. So we want things that we're using all day, every day in that area. And that's going to be our keyboard and our mouse for most of us. Might be coffee for some of you, might be your phone for others, right? Things you're using all day, every day. If you extend your arms and kind of sweep with your arms extended but without leaning forward, that would be your secondary reach zone. So that's that blue area. And that blue area can have things you're using throughout the day, but not as frequently. And that could be open files, could be the phone for some of you that don't use the phone a whole lot. Okay. But I want you to take a look at your setup. And if you're sitting at your desk right now, it's a good time to do this. So most of us will have our keyboard and our mouse closest to us. They might not be close enough though. So can you access your keyboard and your mouse and keep your arms at the side of your body? Or are you reaching forward? And often what leads to that reaching forward is if you like to put your notebook between your keyboard and your mouse, or between your keyboard and your body, or if you just have it further forward and you tend to rest on the work surface. But I would encourage you to keep it as close as you can. And that, you know, the further you reach forward with your hands, the more the muscles in the back of your shoulders and upper back engage. And that's where we can end up with more tension in that area. Okay, so like I said, most of us will have these items to be the closest, but they might just not be quite close enough. So you just want to give that a quick look. Other things that can have an impact on shoulders and neck, cradling the telephone. You know, as I said, traditional phones are in a lot of areas going away. So we tend to be on a headset more anyway. I can't put a percentage of your day that you're on the phone that you need a headset, but if you're on the phone and you need to be doing stuff on the computer, generally speaking, you would benefit from a headset. And, you know, if you're in a private office using speakerphone, doing different things like that, or taking the phone call and telling someone you'll call them back and, you know, do what you need to do on the computer. There's ways around using a headset, but it's generally quite helpful in terms of helping us maintain a neutral posture. All right, so we'll look at the neck next. And really, one of the items that has the biggest impact on our neck is monitor positioning. So we can see the picture on the left, individual's got their head tipped back a little bit. Picture on the right, individual's got their head tipped forward a little bit, right? So monitor positioning definitely has its impact. We've seen this example already where, you know, the person is twisting. That's obviously going to have a negative impact on their neck as well. So when we look at screen position, a couple things we're interested in. Height is the first one. Height and distance are kind of the two primary ones, and then we'll talk about positioning a little bit more. So you can see in the example here, we're showing kind of arm's length is a good starting point. Some of you are going to need to sit closer. Some of you are going to need to sit further. Basically, you want to be at a distance from your monitor that you're not leaning forward, okay? And then height is your second one. So as we can see in the picture on the left, if we position the top of the screen at about eye level, we are able to keep our head upright. If we position it lower than that, we can see that we are tipping our head down. So the reason we set, excuse me, the top at eye level is we look down naturally at 10 to 15 degrees. So for a reasonable distance, which we are in these pictures, we set the top just about eye level. You look down 10 to 15 degrees, you're comfortably looking in the middle. Then you look up for half, down for half. Now, the exception to that is someone who's wearing bifocals or multifocals. Okay, so, and only if they're looking at the bottom of the lens. So if you've got a pair of what a lot of eye doctors will call computer glasses, right? And if you've got computer glasses, I'm using my air quotations here, chances are the lens for you to look at the computer is out of the top, okay? If you don't have those and you need to look out of the bottom, your monitor needs to be lower. Otherwise, you're tipping your head back. And we can kind of see that through the illustration. So if we're tipping our head back, we want to position the monitor lower so we don't have to tip our head back. It's kind of what we're aiming for. And in terms of the exact distance, it depends on how far you sit away, how low in the lens you're looking, all that kind of stuff. It might be a couple inches, it might be 6 inches. It just depends. What you're aiming for is that you can maintain this posture right there where the head is just upright and not tipped back or forward. Okay. In terms of, so that's monitor positioning. So like I said, approximately arm's length away, some will be closer, some will be further, top of the screen at or below eye level. And then that's in terms of physical setup for viewing, but there are a number of things that can lead to visual discomfort. Glare is probably the biggest one, and that's basically any source of light that's either shining into our eyes or reflecting off a surface and into our eyes. And obviously our workstation arrangement can have an impact on that. Most organizations, somebody from a facilities department has laid out your workstation, where the lights are, where the windows are, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of, you probably have a little less control over that, maybe more so the monitor positioning. But these last two are certainly things that you do have control over. So first one is uncorrected visual disorders. And what I mean by that is we have glasses and we don't wear them, or we have glasses and our prescription is out of date, right? We need to keep those, up to date, and we need to make use of them. And I get it. Vision coverage is probably the worst sort of health insurance coverage most of us have. Right, you're still going to be out of pocket when you get all the things the eye doctor tells you your glasses should have, but keeping those up to date is really important. And then the second one is prolonged uninterrupted viewing. And like we all do, like many of us spend the majority of our day staring at a screen, but if we don't take breaks during that time, visual breaks, our eyes are going to become uncomfortable. So really important that we are taking time to look away from time to time. Some of you will have heard of the 20-20-20 rule. So basically every 20 minutes, you look away 20 feet for 20 seconds. That's one we can do. If you've got a window, it's fairly easy. Even if you're in a bullpen setting, if you look, or an open plan setting, if you look to the far wall for 20 seconds, if you've got a picture or something you can look at, or just, you focus on something in the ceiling that's a distance away, anything to get away from that kind of 18 to 36 inch viewing range will help you go through a full change of focus, which is important. Okay, so in terms of sources of glare, overhead lights, windows, right? If you've got work surfaces, if you've got a high gloss finish, most organizations don't buy those anymore. But if you do, you will certainly have more glare that you're dealing with. So in terms of things that we can do, closing blinds at brighter times during the day, making sure our task light is not shining onto our screen. If we've got a task light, it's shining onto our paperwork because that's where we need it. Having our monitor straight up and down rather than tipped back. That will help. And then if we have the choice of where our computer is positioned relative to windows, and you may have more control over this in a home office, you want to make sure that your monitor is perpendicular to the window, right? If we have the monitor right in front of the window, we are going to be looking and have a really bright area behind the window. Behind the monitor, we don't really like that. We also don't want the monitor directly behind us, because then we have light shining in and reflecting off our monitor and into our eyes. So this orientation that you see here is preferable. If you're facing north, if that window faces north, you've got a big tree in front of it, or you're looking at the side of your neighbor's house, it's probably less of a concern. But it's still, you will always get a little bit of additional light from an external window. All right, so wanted to talk about laptops briefly, because many of us are on a laptop, and I know in lots of organizations people use more of a docking station when they're at the office, and then maybe when they go home they just use the laptop. So I want to kind of go through why, or some of the challenges with the laptop. So if we look at the picture on the left, just the laptop, we can see it's a reasonable height for the person, right? For their hands, but you can definitely see that their head is tipped forward, right? And that's not a posture we want. If you put it up on a binder, it makes it a little bit better, but it's still not ideal. Generally speaking, we want to separate our keyboard and mouse from the laptop screen. So here's a relatively easy fix. If you don't have an external monitor, you put you put your laptop up on a box. You have a separate keyboard and mouse, which could be very inexpensive, and all of a sudden you've got both at an appropriate height. Okay, so I would really encourage you, if you are using a laptop exclusively, that you come up with something like this to separate the keyboard and mouse from the laptop, so you're in a better position for both. Here's an example, using this in a standing position. So obviously this individual is quite tall, so their kitchen counter, although it's tall, is not tall enough. So they've put together a couple boxes, not like 20 books. They've found boxes that are an appropriate size. Got one surface for their keyboard and mouse. It gets out up to elbow height. And then they've got a couple boxes to get their screen up to, excuse me, an appropriate height for standing, which I think is great. Relatively inexpensive fix here, but gets things into a much better position. The other thing I'll add, while we're showing an example of somebody standing, working from home, really important that you've got shoes on if you're standing and working. Obviously, we wear shoes when we're in our office, but often many folks tend to not have shoes on when they're working from home. And if you're barefoot, you just don't have the support you would have when you have shoes. Even if it's slippers, pair of sandals, something to provide a little bit more cushioning and more support, at least for while you're standing. I think that's really important, and will make the time you do spend standing more comfortable for you. All right, so there's a couple other things to go through here, and then we'll get right into some Q&A time. So I want you to think about how much of our day we spend stationary. So when we're at work, when we're at the computer, we're sleeping, many of us have a commute, at least on the days when we're going into the office, when we're eating, when we're watching TV. So, we spend a fair amount of time without movement in our day. And why movement is important at kind of a high level, if you think about it, our circulatory system via blood brings us oxygen and nutrients to our muscles, and then it takes waste products away. Now, when we're sitting and not moving around, our heart rate is fairly low. So we're not, our heart's not pumping a whole lot. There's not a whole lot of blood flow. And if we maintain a posture for an extended period of time, and our muscles are still working. So even when we're sitting, our muscles are working at maintaining a particular posture. If we're in an awkward posture, those muscles are working harder generally. And if we're not moving around, we can get that buildup of waste products. Now, if we get up and get some movement, our heart starts pumping, bring more oxygen and nutrients to our muscles, and take those waste products away. And maybe an easier example to think about is if you were to hold your hands out in front of you, your arms fully extended. For many of us, our arms are going to get tired. Within 20 to 60 seconds, we're going to start to feel uncomfortable because our muscles are working, but there's not a whole lot of blood flow. So we're getting those waste products building up, and we kind of run into issues. So movement is important to, change in posture is one thing, but getting a little bit more movement will also help in terms of encouraging blood flow, and then all the benefits you get from that increased blood flow. So, if I look at this list of reasons we don't move, there's a whole bunch of them. Really, the most important one is the one in the middle, and that's habit. If our habit is to sit and not move a whole lot, then we'll continue to do that. And I get people tell me all kinds of different things. Oh, you wouldn't understand. I just get sucked into my work. Well, I'm busy too. I do as well. But if your habit is to get some movement into that, and try and avoid that extended periods of sedentary work, that can be really helpful. So one of the things I like to tell people is, even if you get up and have a little stretch, even if it's 15 or 20 seconds and you don't leave your desk area, you still get benefit out of that, right? We don't need to go for a 5-minute walk to get the full benefit. You get more benefit out of that, but even just a little movement, shorter movements more frequently are still helpful and still useful, and we don't want to avoid that. So some things on here, really, it's trying to figure out how to build that habit of getting up. If you don't, if you drink more water, that certainly helps. You can use break reminders. That's one way of doing it. On days when you are in the office, if you have the opportunity to go and see somebody and move about, I think that's great. Obviously, we spend a lot of time online and in Teams and in different methods of where we contact people and using email and that sort of thing. But if we have the option to, I think that's helpful. Another thing I would, I heard people talk about a lot during the pandemic, and I would encourage you that if you are working from home more of the time, this is still helpful, is sort of that idea of, creating a mock commute. So getting up, getting dressed, going for a walk around the block or two or whatever it happens to be, then coming in and starting your day. It's kind of a nice way to start and end the day and kind of give you some physical cues. And then it just gets you some movement that you might miss out on if you don't have that commute anymore. I'm not suggesting you go for a drive, but just to get some more physical activity. So different things that can be done to get movement, I think, is all helpful. So just a couple slides here, and Rob will send these out in email, some access to some online training resources. We've got some resources as well that